Okay, now tells me that I am doing that, so I'm going to close these other screens. Okay, we're still okay. All right, Lorraine, let's get started and let's see if we're okay.
Okay, I'll give it a try. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to read the Sunday Forum story. Sunday Forums have been part of Sunday mornings for over 50 years at First Unitarian Society. All scheduling and hosting is accomplished by volunteers. The forums support our mission. We gather together to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, inspire action. This lecture series showcases provocative and sometimes controversial speakers discussing topical issues of the day. Forum presentations are the responsibility of the presenters, who are invited to share their experience and knowledge. Presenters do not receive honoraria. The content of forums may not always express the viewpoint of First Unitarian Society Milwaukee, but are meant to offer thoughtful topics for our members to often pursue further on their own. And Jerry will introduce our presenter today.
Okay, thanks very much, Lorraine. We're very happy to present Jacob Malinowski, who's a candidate for the 82nd Assembly District in the last election in this area. And the reason I'm excited is that because for many, many years, we've had the same incumbent representative. The 82nd District, I should mention the 82nd District is Franklin, and it's parts of Greenfield and meanders up through Hales Corners and Greendale, and it's all kind of chopped up on the northern end of it. It's pretty much meanders all over the place up there. So we've had the same incumbent in this area for many, many years. Most of us who are a little bit more progressive are very dissatisfied with him. He's not very responsive. He doesn't know what he's talking about half the time when you go to his listening sessions. And so when we saw there were a couple of people, a couple of candidates that are going to be running against him, we were just overjoyed to see finally we're going to have some candidates. And as we saw more and more about Jacob on social media, this young man who is a graduate of Yale, and he's putting his degree in political science to use right away. We became quite impressed with him, and we thought, wow, this young upstart is going to take on this guy that's been in office now for like 5 terms. So we thought, we've got to support him. And so Jill and I both did what we could to help, and I wish we could have done a little bit more, but anyway, I think he has a really compelling story, and I think you cannot believe the amount of work and effort and how he busted his butt to run this campaign. So I'll turn this over to Jacob. Thanks, Jacob, for being here today.
Yes, thank you, Jerry, for inviting me. Thank you, Lorraine. I hope I'm not that provocative. I haven't been called provocative in a very long time, I don't think. Sorry if there's any technical difficulties. There was a coffee spill on my laptop yesterday, and so we are doing this all from my phone. But I'm kind of a technology native, if you couldn't tell from my face. So hopefully I can get this all arranged. My name is Jacob Malinowski. I grew up and have lived my entire life in Greendale, Wisconsin, right here on Milwaukee's southwest side. So Jerry kind of called me back in December and explained to me this forum you do with different folks from a lot of different backgrounds, and asked me if I wanted to come. I said, sure. I would do anything for Jerry. He was incredibly helpful throughout the campaign. was a really early supporter. And it's really, really nice to have people in your corner kind of from day one. So if Jerry picked up the phone, I'm definitely going to answer. So he said, kind of talk about your life, kind of talk about the campaign. And so I think I'm going to sort of split it up into both of those. So you get to know me before I was at all political, before I was a public figure, for what it's worth, and then kind of talk about the meat and potatoes of the campaign, because I think a lot of people kind of interact from elections because they show up and go vote, and they see a bunch of ads all over their Facebook and their television, and that's kind of how 95% of people see elections. And so I'm going to give you kind of the other 5% from the background. I know you've probably heard from candidates and politicians before, but I think my story, being a first-time candidate, not ever really wanting to do this from the get-go, being so young, being from the area, I think maybe could glean some insights. So I'm 22 years old. I was born in 1998, not to make anybody feel at all dated. I've lived in the same house. If anybody's familiar with Greendale, I live in O section. My mother is a credit manager at Alto-Shaam, which makes ovens in Menominee Falls. My dad is a 4th generation carpenter. His father was a carpenter, his father was a carpenter, his father was a carpenter, all union members. So I kind of grew up in a very, very typical middle-class white suburban home. I went to the public schools in Greendale. I went to College Park and the middle school and the high school. I was always really interested sort of in the more soft science area in school. I really liked school, but I was really interested in things like social studies and speech and debates, but never really thought about politics until I got into high school. I really liked my AP US history class I took while in high school. I happened to sit on the school board as a student in Greendale. In Greendale, there are 2 students on the school board, sort of to give input and advice. And when I first joined, it was kind of a ceremonial role, I should say, in that it looked really good to have students on your school board. And when I was there, and the young man who followed me, his name was Travis, we wanted it to be more of a real thing. That was my first foray into local government. I was picked to sit on the school board and show up to the meetings and sit silently while all the adults talked. And I wanted the students to actually have a voice in their decision-making process. So we ended up giving reports. I can distinctly remember the first meeting that I just sort of spoke. And the whole room went quiet and everyone sort of looked at me like I was speaking out of turn. But I think that insight was really appreciated, not only coming from a different person, but that person being a young person. And sometimes local government makes decisions that are really, really far removed from the people they affect. So when the school board writes a policy, it goes to the administrators who impose it on their lead teachers, who impose it on their teachers, who then finally get to the students. And so the feedback doesn't usually get there. And I realized a lot of these lessons really early on was that it was super important to have someone who was directly affected by the policy, got what was going on, and was able to sort of communicate that in normal words. So of course, it'd be really easy for a student to go on the school board and say, let's never have homework again, and school should be 1 hour a day. But I really wanted to take it into how do the computers you've given every student actually look in the classroom? Because you had to go through a bunch of budget decisions, and you had consultants come in, and you talked a lot about technology access, but what does it actually look like for a classroom of students to all have their own laptop? And that was what really got my interest going in government and political campaigns. I would say that was one of 2 big moments early on in my, albeit short life so far, that got me interested in government. The second one was that I was fortunate enough to attend a program my summer after my junior year of high school called Badger Boys State. Some of you may have heard of the program, but for those of you who have not, it's something run by the American Legion, a group for servicemen and women. Every summer for 1 week, they take boys from across the state, have them live at Ripon College in Ripon, Wisconsin for a week, and they simulate Wisconsin government. So the boys are put into groups of 30. Those are cities. There are 3 cities in a county, and all of the counties, all 9 of them, make up Badger Boys State. So you live with these guys, you elect a mayor and alderman. And then later on in the week, you elect a county executive and county supervisors. And then later on in the week, you elect a governor of Badger Boy State. And so it's sort of a big government simulation, but it was a lot more than that. You learn about what it means to be an American citizen, what it means to respect those who served our country, what it means to be a man, especially in the 21st century, how important it is to be emotional and a good communicator. And this was a super formative experience in my life. I actually go back as a counselor every year, unpaid. It's how much the program means to me. And I got to experience firsthand, not only the government simulation, but to hear from folks about how important it is to get involved in your community if you want to see something change and if you care about it. A small group of passionate people are the only things that ever really change the world. And that's what I really took away from that, beyond the government simulation, which was super fun to sort of geek out and, write laws and all this fun campaign and all this fun stuff. I really took the leadership building, the community advocacy part to heart. Then it became my senior year of high school. I went to Greendale High School, which is a public school, graduating class of about 240 people. Most folks there go to Wisconsin schools or public schools, Big Ten schools across the Midwest. And I really, really wanted to see something that was different from Wisconsin. I lived in the same small village in the same house my entire life. Neither of my parents had gone to college. So I wanted to see something different. I've always been a pretty adventurous kind of guy. And so I applied to Georgetown University, a school that had me for a summer program and was in the heart of DC and what I always thought I wanted in my entire life. I got in early and I was over the moon. I got like a Georgetown sweater for Christmas. I was super stoked on going there. And then the day the Yale application was due, I decided, what the heck, it was still sort of on my list. I'd heard about it. It seemed kind of cool. So I quickly made an application on January 1st, turned it in that day and kind of forgot about it and was planning my life in DC in Georgetown as a young guy who had never left the state before and lived anywhere else. I was super excited. Then I got a letter while I was at my dentist's office in March explaining that I had somehow gotten into Yale. No one from my high school had ever even applied to an Ivy League school, much less gotten in. And so I didn't really know what to do. I didn't really have the means to go out and tour. The university said that they would pay for it themselves. And so I hopped on a plane that weekend, went and toured Yale and absolutely fell in love with the school. And knew that's where I wanted to go, dropped all my Georgetown plans and I graduated from high school in 2016 and enrolled in Yale. That was sort of my life kind of before college. I was always sort of interested in politics, learned a lot of life lessons, and really appreciate my hometown. Growing up in such a small village of 14,000 people, where all of the streets are alphabetized, where everybody knows your neighbor, where there's a bunch of small community events, gave me a really impactful meaning of community, of caring about people you don't even know. What it means to kind of grow up with a lot of people watching your back, whether that be your neighbors or your friends or strangers, and knowing the people who surround you. And that's what kind of sold me on Yale, was the same sense of community I was going to get at college. I really enjoyed my time at school. It's where I found out a lot about myself and about my interests. I did a lot of political things while I was at school. My first foray into political campaigns was in a city council race in New Haven. There are 30 people who make up the city council of New Haven, which is a town of 160,000 people. It's split up into districts because it's a city council. One of those districts captures almost all of campus where students live. So that ward is almost always represented by a student. The incumbent student had long since graduated, so it was an open seat. And there was a young man from New Haven who lived in the dorms who wanted to run for city council. I was in a class with him. I had said something smart in class one day, I guess, and he said, you should come to this meeting. And it was like a full-fledged incredibly important, almost presidential level campaign staff. There were like 30 students working on it. We were raising money. We were creating ads. We were doing all this like crazy stuff, kind of as almost as a simulation. We were almost playing pretend because he ran uncontested and 100 people voted in the election. But it was an incredibly fun experience. There were all these older students who were doing politics as a career. They were, running. One of the person who was leading the campaign ran the mayor of London's campaign. They were doing things at a congressional level and a Senate level. They were oodles smarter than me, and I was just a first year at school. And so that really kind of gave me the bug for political campaigns, even though for all intents and purposes, he could have just put his name on the ballot and won. We took it way too seriously, and I had such a great time. I had an internship in Senator Baldwin's office that following summer, where I learned a lot more about government. I would consider Senator Baldwin one of my political heroes. I think she has a bunch of courage, has been able to cross party lines when it matters, and sticks to her guns when it matters even more. Is an incredible campaigner, was an incredible boss. I really enjoyed my time in her office. And then I spent more time getting involved in politics. I was able to run a political action committee while still in college, which instead of just giving money to candidates, it actually paid for internships for low-income students to work on those campaigns. So not only was it giving the candidate money, but it was giving them a staff member, and it was helping those people get involved in politics. It's really hard to get your first step in politics. I was fortunate enough that I went to a crazy school where all this stuff was happening. But for a lot of people, if you don't know the right person, it's really hard to get involved in politics, especially in any sort of paid way. So that's what this PAC did. We were able to raise $150,000 in 6 months. We endorsed 18 candidates. We sent 45 young people with a $5,000 check to go work over the summer for these progressive candidates, help them win all across the country in the 2018 midterms, flip a bunch of these seats from red to blue. And that was a really formative experience in my college life. The last sort of political thing I did at school was back in New Haven politics. The person who I had elected in 2017 to run for city council was worried that I was going to run someone against him in 2019. I had no plans to, but I think he was a little bit worried about that. So he introduced me to this man named Justin. Justin was thinking about running for mayor of New Haven. I sat down with him about 12 months before the election in 2019. He said he wanted to run. He was a super passionate young guy, really cared about his family, really cared about his community, loved New Haven. So I jumped on his campaign really early on. He was a long shot progressive candidate trying to unseat a corrupt 6-year incumbent who was not interested in listening to her community. Even though she grew up in one of the poorer parts of New Haven, she now had an armed security escort drive her everywhere. Justin rode his bike and took the bus. Instead of caring about the schools or New Haven's water supply or our emergency services, she was worried about helping her son, who was a slumlord in New Haven. There was all of these crazy differences. And even though Justin lived in a wealthier, richer, whiter part of New Haven, he spent all of his time caring about the whole city. That's when I learned that in order to succeed in politics, you have to find candidates and causes you really, really care about. I had tried a job for a woman in a different part of Connecticut, and we just didn't get along. I didn't think she was a very good boss. She was super mean to her staff, and I was just not passionate about what she was. And it made showing up for work at a thing I really enjoyed, an opportunity I would never normally have as a 20-year-old, really, really hard. I hated taking the train to work. I hated my job, even though I was supposed to love what I was doing. So when I found Justin, I immediately hooked my wagon to his, helped him get his campaign situated, all still while studying at school, and loved every second of it. It's great to be an underdog. You have no expectations. Every small victory feels like a huge one. Every dollar feels like 20. Every vote feels like 100. So we ran a really guerrilla campaign. Justin knocked the doors of every single neighborhood in New Haven. ones where he looked like his neighbors, ones where he didn't, ones where the houses were new and fixed up with brand new paint, and ones where the houses hadn't been touched in 30 years. He really, really cared about his community. And as we were heading into the August primary, it still kind of felt like a long shot. In New Haven, since everyone is a Democrat, it kind of comes down to that first primary in late August, early September. That's kind of the real election. The November one doesn't really matter because the Democratic nominee is going to get 90% of the votes. And so we were heading into there with a lot of momentum. He did really well at the debates. There were a lot of corrupt things coming out about New Haven City Hall, whether it was lead in paint, whether it was campaign finance issues, whether it was staffers doing political stuff on city dime. And Justin was not afraid to take bold stances. New Haven was the first sanctuary city back in 2006. New Haven is an immigrant community where 36 languages are spoken within 8 square miles. And Justin wasn't afraid to embrace that. We headed into the August primary, hoping it would be really close so that we could then run as an independent in November and maybe eat up some of the Republican votes. Maybe when more people showed up, we would, have a few extra votes. We were hoping to get really, really close in that primary so that we would have justification to keep running. On that campaign, I learned that you're never really out until the election is over. No matter what bad things happen, he had a really, really bad debate where the current mayor filled the room with a bunch of her supporters an hour before we could get there. So they would boo him before he even started talking and just heckle him from this big auditorium. And he just kind of got flustered and didn't really know what to say or how to react. That was tough. There were days where the doors would be really slow or the money wouldn't really come in. And even though we were the long shot from the beginning, it felt really discouraging. Justin had this great can-do attitude about him that it wasn't over until all of the votes were counted. So we kept fighting. The September primary came. New Haven elections close at 9 p.m. I was kind of managing a lot of the wards in New Haven, tracking the polling places, making sure people were able to vote. Nobody was kind of hustling them at the door. It's New Haven city politics. So I could tell war stories about city politics for a long time. And there was a ward in the northwestern part of New Haven. It was actually the incumbent mayor's home turf. Last time Justin ran, he got 20% of the vote there. So I was following that ward very closely because if he could crack 33%, we were going to have a pretty good election day. That ward was the first one to report. They counted all their votes within 6 minutes. So I got the phone call of the number of votes at that ward. He lost by 1 vote in that ward. So 6 minutes after the polls closed, we were far, far exceeding expectations in one ward. And I knew right then and there we were going to have an excellent night. Turns out we actually won the Democratic primary out of nowhere. I don't think anyone really saw it coming. But looking at the map, what happened was the people who we thought were going to vote for us all showed up. And Justin really, really worked hard to integrate himself both into the Latinx part of town and into the Black part of town. And we did super, super well in both areas. We won about 60% of the vote on primary night. She decided she was still going to run again, and we creamed her in the general. That's where I really got this, fighter passion in me from. He woke up every day with a ton of energy, a ton of enthusiasm, because he really, really cared about his community, and it paid off in the end. We were super successful. It was the best campaign I've worked on, including my own. I don't know if anything will ever really be able to top that experience. I had such a good time doing that. Meanwhile, that was September of 2019. The fall of 2019 was kind of a tough spot here in our community. I was going through my senior year at school. Here in the southwest suburbs, there were 3 cases of youth suicide in 2019. 2 of them were at Greenfield High School. One of them was where I went to high school in Greendale. A young man, 17 years old, named Rex. Rex was the younger brother of a very, very close friend of mine while I was here, named Ben. Rex was in the band. He was a super positive individual, I made plenty of friends, was doing really well in school, was just like a wonder to be around. Enthusiastic, funny, goofy young man. And he took his own life in November of 2019. That same day, my state rep, Ken Skronsky, didn't show up to vote on suicide prevention bills that would have helped fund suicide prevention centers all across Wisconsin, help with mental health here in our state. It's not that he had an opinion and I disagreed with it. It's that he didn't even show up. On the same day that a young man who went to my high school, whose older brother was a very good friend of mine, took his own life. That, to be completely honest, pissed me off. It made me really mad that someone could have such disregard for their community, especially in a time of hurt, especially when two other young individuals took their lives in the weeks before. In fact, he was actually seen at a football game that day. And that really just ground my gears. I thought that was, I have told my story in government for the first 21 years of my life about positivity, about impacting local change, about people who cared about their community, who were willing to listen to outsiders, who were willing to step up enthusiastically and fight. And he was the exact opposite of all of that. And it sort of convexed right there. And so I was mad, and I was coming off of a great win in New Haven. And so when I came back for winter break, I scoured my community to find someone to run for this seat. I was kind of involved in school board elections and local elections. I kind of knew the, 10 very public Democrats in Greendale, because at the time it was not really a fashionable thing to be publicly on the left in my community. I talked to all of them. I ended up talking to about 24 people in my hometown. I asked them all to run. I said, I would come back. I don't have a ton of experience, but I have some. I will run your campaign for free. I'll just live at home and we'll put up a good fight. It will be good for our community. I really think you can do this. I had this conversation with about 20, 25 people. All of them said no, which was really hard at the time because I was mad. I was motivated. I thought this would be a really cool opportunity for me to help someone in my community beat this guy who just doesn't even show up for work, doesn't listen to his community, is impossible to reach, makes no attempt to communicate. Again, it wasn't that we disagreed, even though we did on almost everything. It was that he didn't show up. It was that if we did agree or disagree, I'd have no idea because there was no way to get in contact with him. So I asked all of these people if they wanted to run, if they wanted to help our community. There were like 20 political people I knew. All of them said no. All of them asked me why I wasn't doing it. So I talked with my family. I talked with some folks I was close with back at school. And that January, I decided that I would kind of throw my hat in the ring. Decisions are made by those who show up. I figured if no one else was going to do it, someone had to. I was kind of willing to fall on that sword. I never really saw myself as a public person. I really liked politics behind the scenes because I liked helping other people in their ambition. I liked all the mechanics of going behind the scene, and I didn't really think I would want to give up my right to privacy and all this other stuff that comes with the baggage of being in public. But I did it because no one else would. So that January, I started doing the stuff you do when you start a political campaign. That includes, thinking through policy. What are you going to stand for? That means talking with influential people in the community. What do they hear from their folks? So I talked with a bunch of leaders of faith communities, including those I did not necessarily agree with. I talked with a lot of elected representatives. In my part of town, they are mostly not on the left. So we had a lot of disagreements. I talked with small business owners. I talked with other influential volunteer leaders, community members to kind of get a good pulse. That's what I think a good candidate should do, because I definitely don't know everything and I don't have all the answers, but I'd like to think I'm a good listener and I'm good at figuring out the person who does have the answer. So I did a lot of that. In those conversations, I learned a lot about my hometown that I'd never really known beforehand. So I can distinctly remember I sent an email to a bunch of faith leaders across the community I sent one to a man who is the pastor at Jubilee Family Church over on, what is that, Oakwood or Ryan Road, southern part of Franklin. He ended up calling me. He asked me what political party I was from. I said, I'm going to be running as a Democrat, but I've got different ideas on policy. You know, I really appreciate a conversation. He said, I don't know if I could have a conversation with an open baby murderer, was the first thing he said to me on the phone. Mind you, I am a 21-year-old dude. I'm a pretty positive person, and that was jarring to hear. So the phone call went silent, and he said, if you still want to come into my office, you can. So for the first time in my life, I was nervous about meeting someone. I drove to Jubilee Family Church. This was right kind of before the pandemic started. This would be, you know, late February, early March. And I sat down with him and we had an hour-long conversation where we talked about things that were important to him and to his congregation. And while some of that we vehemently disagreed on, some of that was really political, some of that we were never going to be able to find a bridge over, we ended up agreeing on a lot of things. They run a, like pre-K, 4K, 5K program at Jubilee. So he cares about early childhood education. In fact, he wants anyone to be able to attend his program, regardless of their ability to pay. So we left that conversation agreeing on early childhood education access for everyone in our state, no matter what they look like, no matter whether or not they can afford to pay a tuition, no matter what sort of background they come from. So this incredibly conservative pastor who called me a murderer over the phone ended up agreeing with some of the policy positions I put forward simply because I was willing to have a conversation with him, because I was willing to listen to him, and because I was willing to frame what I thought through his lens. That was one of the first antagonistic conversations I had. And when I knew that this was going to be a tough thing, but that it was doable, because this person who said he sat outside Planned Parenthood clinics and protested all throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, one of the most conservative men I've ever met in my entire life, ended up saying he would vote for me. That was wild. And so I had a lot more of these conversations throughout February and March. Started working on things like a website, like policy, setting up my social media, a lot of the things that come into a campaign. And at that point, it was not all that real for me yet. It was kind of still almost like a project, or like I was kind of doing it for someone else. It wasn't that I was really the candidate yet, because everything I was doing, a campaign manager or an advisor could also do. Set up the social media, write all this stuff. So it was not really me yet. And that made the beginning part much, much easier because, I wasn't the candidate yet, even though, my face was on everything, my name was on everything. It almost felt like I was doing this for someone else. Then you might be familiar with this thing called COVID-19. That happened in March. I came home for spring break, and then I never went back to New Haven and haven't been back since. School got canceled, everything got canceled. You all know this whole story, so I won't really go into it. I'll kind of talk about how it affected me. What I was going to do was come back for spring break, have a lot more of these conversations, go back, finish school, come back home in May, and right out the gate, start running. Well, now I was stuck at home with nothing else to do. So I decided, you know what, why don't I start running earlier, getting my name out there even earlier? And when the pandemic is done in June, I'll have, all my feet set. I'll be able to get out on doors. It'll be such a good time. So in March, April, and May, I was a full-time graduating senior at Yale University while running a political campaign with my name on it, which was very stressful. But I learned the delicate balance, and it showed me how passionate I was about this thing, that I was willing to spend, 8 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours a day on a campaign, and 4 to 6 hours a day on school, and still have time to eat and sleep and all that good stuff. So attending Zoom University while graduating and still never having been back to New Haven is a little bit rough. But I continue to work on my campaign, continue to do the things you do behind the scenes, all the paperwork, all that good stuff. And in order to run for office in Wisconsin, you need to collect signatures for people who would be able to vote for you in order to get your name on the ballot. That signature collection starts in the middle of April and ends on June 1st. So I decided, why not start my campaign the same day I can start collecting signatures? So on April 15th, I launched everything. I'm going to pull up our launch video. It's about 3 minutes long. This was scripted, written by me. It was filmed by a friend of my mom's at work. This is sort of what we launched our campaign around, is this video. In the modern era, this is how a lot of campaigns sort of start, is with a video they try to get to go viral on social media. I was not really expecting anything big. You know, I'm running for state assembly in a small suburban town. No one has ever heard of me before. So I was hoping my friends from Greendale and Franklin would share it around and stuff like that. And I was super proud of how the video turned out. So I'm going to try to get it up on my phone. I have to share my screen. This is my first time doing Zoom on the phone, by the way. Okay, so everyone should be able to see my screen. Now we go to Google Drive. If Jerry or Mark could unmute so that I know I'm doing this correctly, that would be great.
You should be, it's already.
Can you see me scrolling through my Google Drive right now?
Oh, yeah, you're good.
Okay, great.
My name is Jacob Malinowski, and I'm running for Wisconsin.
You can hear everything okay?
Yeah, it's not coming through.
Okay, I'm gonna press play, and as long as you can hear everything okay, then we'll keep going.
Okay.
My name is Jacob Malinowski, and I'm running for Wisconsin State Assembly here in the 82nd District of Franklin, Greendale, and Greenfield, because I think we ought to start having conversations again.
I've spent my entire life right here in the O section of Greendale. This is the village that raised me, and I was brought up to believe that politicians work together to find common solutions to common problems. Nowadays, politics is way too divisive. It's easy to feel like nobody is listening to you. Our current assemblyman ignores our voices, fails to communicate a vision, and simply votes the way his party tells him to. Our community needs and deserves an energetic and accessible assemblyman who will actually hear us out.
My family's bipartisan. Growing up, I sat down every night for supper with my father, a Republican, my mother, a Democrat, and we talked and listened to each other. I think it's time we brought this same supper table attitude to the state assembly so that we can cut through the tribalism and get things done.
So many of the opportunities I had were made possible by the phenomenal staff in our public schools. And I want every student to have that same experience. Let's invest in our students, provide them with resources to address mental health, and set them on a path to succeed after graduation. And let's actually get our youth to stay in Wisconsin. We need to make our state an attractive destination for entrepreneurs looking to start a small business, or families looking to find a home. And this all starts with a lower tax burden on the middle class. But we can't focus on any of these priorities if we're sick. We need to take bold measures to simplify healthcare and lower the price of copays and drug prices for everyone, especially at-risk groups like seniors and our neighbors with disabilities. We also need to step up and fight for those who fought so hard for us. I volunteer every year to teach young men about the great sacrifices our veterans made. We need to expand our service to veterans, take care of their families, and find new ways to tackle the rising problems of suicide and PTSD.
These are just a few of the ideas I want to bring to Madison, but I'm more interested in hearing what's important to you. In the dozens of conversations I've already had, I've heard about the ways quarry blasting regulations affect Franklin homes, or how the opioid epidemic impacts our communities of faith. Regardless of your political beliefs, I want to get to know you as your neighbor and your advocate. In fact, here's my personal cell phone number. I want you to call or text me whenever you want to be heard, on any issue, at any time. You should be able to contact your assemblyman on your schedule, not on his.
Over the next 6 months, I hope we have time to chat. At your door, the grocery store, or wherever else we run into each other. We've got difficult challenges and new opportunities in 2020, and the same old politics just won't cut it. I'm Jacob Malinowski, and I'm running for Wisconsin State Assembly here in the 82nd District because we need fresh, new leadership to start talking about how to make Madison work for us. And I can't wait to have that conversation with you.
Excellent. Okay, I'm coming back. So that's what we launched with back in April. I hope it kind of came through my phone all right. You can kind of see from the video, I was kind of running on 3 big things. Number one, first and foremost, is that I really, really wanted to listen to the people in my community. That is my cell phone number. If you call it right now, it will ring the phone I'm doing Zoom on. So please don't do that. But I put my phone number everywhere. It was on every piece of mail we sent out to 15,000 homes. It was on television. It was online. It was on all of my literature. It was everywhere. This cell phone. So that if you have a problem and you don't really know who to go to, you don't really know what the issue is, you can call me and either I'll solve it or I'll figure it out. It was really important to me that politicians were accessible. That was the only way I was going to be able to do this job, is if I felt like my community could come to me if they had a problem. Because that's why I got into this race in the first place, was someone who didn't show up, someone who did not care at all. The second thing was that I was running on real ideas. I think politicians across the political spectrum say a lot of fun buzzwords, which sometimes mean something and sometimes don't. Buzzwords are also really good at alienating people from the other side. So while I think everyone should have access to healthcare regardless of their ability to pay, at no point did I say Medicare for all, because that's a word that has been bombarded throughout right-wing circles. And when you hear that, you think a lot of negative things. But the number of people who I could get to agree with the idea that your neighbor should be able to go to the doctor if they're sick, even if they can't afford to, was much higher than the number of people I think we would have been able to get to agree with us if I had said, I'm running on Medicare for all. The same thing happened with a lot of different policy angles. Not only did I want to show myself as actually having thought through these things, but that I wasn't going to run on the same nonsense that everyone was, that my opponent was doing, which is just say the right words, never really say anything of substance, and get away with it. I had so many great conversations on free technical school. So it wasn't free school for everyone, though I hope Wisconsin gets there at some point. It was the idea that the trades right now are underemployed. You would make a good wage. And if the idea between an unemployed young person and someone who is in a trade for 40 years is $1,000 tuition, the state of Wisconsin should pay for that. I got so many conservatives to agree with that idea, not because I ran on free college for everyone, but because I explained the idea. So someone who is always available, someone who explains, and someone whose campaign is for everyone. So we wanted to make an inclusive environment, no matter what you look like, no matter where you were from, and most importantly, no matter who you voted for in the past. My opponent ran unopposed every single time he ran. So I voted for him in the past. My father voted for Donald Trump. He is a Republican as long as the day is. I wanted people like my father to get on board with my campaign. At the end of the day, my dad did vote for me. He also voted for Joe Biden. We had a Joe Biden sign in our yard, for what it's worth. I wanted people like that to come into our coalition, because in my mind, Republicans and conservatives were not the enemy that sometimes Democrats make them out to be. That was not who my enemy was. My enemy was big pharmaceutical who were exploiting Wisconsin residents. It was factory farms who were sending the Franklin farms out of business. It was big developers who were taking advantage of tax loopholes and raising our taxes. Those were my enemies, not Republicans or conservatives who maybe voted for different presidential candidates or disagreed with me. I wasn't afraid to say I was a Democrat, but I don't think that ever truly accurately described what I was doing. Maybe the word populist describes it, though Donald Trump has kind of ruined that word. Maybe progressive describes it, but I think people have a different idea of what that means. So I kind of just forwent political labels at every opportunity and just campaigned on policy, campaigned on listening, and campaigned as being an active member of the community. I'd lived there my entire life. They were the streets I learned how to drive a car on, all that fun stuff. I went to high school there, so I cared. It was my home. I was willing to fight for it and do whatever it took. So then we got into the campaign, and you may have noticed in the video, I said, I'm excited to meet you at your door or at the grocery store. Well, as you all know, that hasn't happened in like a year. So we had the campaign completely online. So not only was I a new person on the political scene, not only was I the youngest candidate running for office in Wisconsin, but I was now campaigning completely online. So all this experience I thought I had doing politics in New Haven, doing politics in DC, all these campaigns I was hoping would help me kind of get my foot going. It was all useless because on a campaign, you go knock your neighborhoods in a strategic way. You have those conversations. That's what wins votes, is talking to people. That wasn't going to happen. We tried to knock doors for about a month in June, but then the pandemic got worse again, and I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't think it represented who I was or my priorities very well. So we did everything online. We ran a really, really aggressive digital campaign. So that video I just showed you, I said I was hoping to kind of circulate through my friends, maybe get 500 views. It blew up online. It right now has 6,000 or 7,000 views on Facebook. It has 70,000 views on Twitter. It exploded. My phone shut down. I was getting so many notifications because people got so excited about our campaign. On a national level for my rinky-dink state assembly race. It blew up everywhere. And what that did was twofold. Blowing up on Facebook means that people I had never met before, but who actually lived near me, saw my campaign. I got a lot of early support because of it. And number two, it blowing up on Twitter brought in a lot of money I was not expecting at all. People from Arkansas and Florida and Nevada, who I'd never met in my entire life, donated $3 online because they liked my energy. They thought the video was, cute and fun, and that I was doing it for the right reasons. And so we brought all these small dollar donations in from people I'd never met before because it blew up. So we went aggressive online. I was posting every day. I was live streaming. We were hosting events. We were really trying to stay engaged where people were at in the pandemic. People were spending all their time online. So why not do the same? I spent a lot of time on the phone. Most of my waking hours were spent calling people. That's hard. It's hard for me to sit in my room and stare at a wall and to call people all day. People were not picking up their phones, but it was what we had to do. We sent texts. We wrote letters, handwritten letters to people. We had our volunteers do the same thing. So I'm a mom in Franklin, and I'm not always a Democrat, but I'm voting for Jacob because of XYZ. Sending those to other moms in Franklin. We tried every single technique under the sun, and we were willing to do it because I was willing to take risks. I was not in this to become famous. I never really wanted to be an elected person. I was in this because my opponent did not represent the district. I was doing a very poor job at representing me, and I was sick of it. So I was willing to take risks. We were really successful online, more successful than people who had done before, more successful than people running for bigger offices, because I worked my butt off, kind of like Jerry said. So as the months went on, it was looking like the pandemic was kind of going to be a staple of our campaign and probably not going to end before the primary election, and definitely not before the general election. So that's what we adapted our campaign to do. If newspapers wanted to cover it, great. We had events. If people wanted to get engaged with our campaign, they would find it online in the same way that my opponent was not. He actually made a website and a Facebook and a Twitter once he saw that mine had gained a bunch of traction. They're all now since deleted, but we forced my opponent to come online. We forced him to say something. The primary election happened. We won 2/3 of the votes. My primary opponent was in it for good reasons. I'm glad he ran, but we were running a serious campaign. We ended up raising a lot of money. in those first few months. My goal, what I thought a state assembly campaign needed to finish, was $40,000. By June, we had $25,000. So I thought we were on track. We were going to make it. We're spending our money really wisely. And then we started gearing up for the general election. So I'm going to show you kind of our relaunch video. I wanted to put more momentum back into our campaign after the primary. So in one weekend, we wrote, shot, edited, and filmed this video to kind of give our campaign a new angle. Some stuff had changed over the course of the campaign, and I wanted to adapt to that. My opponent had not shown up for work at his state assembly job in over 100 days. Throughout the pandemic, the Wisconsin state legislature did nothing. They didn't show up for work. They just kind of sat at home, and ever since April, passed no bills, were not interested in helping their community. And that made me mad. And that's sort of where we were taking our campaign. All this stuff I was saying way back last March about how my opponent doesn't show up, he doesn't engage, he doesn't care. He was living it out. He was giving us more and more and more to feed off of. And it fed my original narrative. A lot of people had to kind of switch what they were talking about. We just had to enhance it. And so we went full steam ahead on this idea that your current state assembly member does not think for his own and is not willing to represent you. And I'm ready. I'll be ready on day one, despite how young I am, because of my energy, because of my passion, because of my willingness to listen. This video also blew up online for different reasons. It's a little funny. It's a little goofy, but I think it represented my campaign well, and it got a lot of good traction. So I'm going to share my screen again. This is our relaunch ad we shared after the primary in August. Oops, let's see. Start podcast. Great. Back to my Google Drive.
My name is Jacob Malinowski, and I'm running for state assembly here in the 82nd district of Franklin, Greendale, and Greenfield, because I think we need a leader who is up for the challenge. 2020 has been difficult. We have no idea what lies ahead. Our representative needs to be ready no matter what is thrown at them. Partisan politics in Madison has led to so much dysfunction, and my opponent just does whatever his party bosses tell him to do. Did you know it's been over 100 days since he even showed up for work and passed any meaningful legislation in the middle of a pandemic? We need active leadership that listens to us and brings real bipartisan ideas to Madison. And that's exactly what I plan to do. I think it's about time our politicians shut up, started listening to public health experts, and followed the data so that we can keep our families safe and get our economy back on track. Next, we've got to end gerrymandering. A few years ago, our politicians drew their districts so that they would never lose. My opponent is more interested in winning, not listening to you. I think it's time we take this process out of the hands of politicians and draw fair maps so that your vote matters and you can hold me accountable. And as a graduate of our public schools, I want to invest in our future. My opponent will claim he funded schools at record levels, but when it came time to vote on returning some of that to your property taxes and investing in the schools, he was too scared to disagree with his party, so he chose to do nothing. This year, you finally have a choice to make on your ballot. I'm running because I'm fed up with the same inactive leadership year after year. It doesn't matter which party you normally vote for or who you've supported in the past. I'm ready to work hard to earn your vote. 2020 is going to come down to you, so don't toss that decision away. My name is Jacob Malinowski, and I'm asking for your support on November 3rd because we need leaders who will tackle anything thrown their way. I'm up for the challenge. Are you?
Told you it was a little goofy, but I think really got across what we were trying to do. which was, I'm ready to lead, I'm active, I'm really interested. Here are the ideas of the day. And it had a lot of downfall effects. Number one, it blew up online again. Number two, it kind of convinced the Democratic Party that this was an area worth investing. So I said before, I was hoping to raise $40,000. We had 25 in the bank to begin with. Our ending budget was $330,000 because money just started pouring in. We had good poll results throughout the fall. I was sticking to the fundamentals. I wasn't going to big rallies. I wasn't doing, the fluff. I was calling people day in and day out, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, trying to convince them to vote and running an aggressive digital campaign online. We had good poll results. Wisconsin was looking like it was going to go hard for Biden. We raised a boatload of money. My opponents continued to disregard the pandemic, continued to do nothing. So much so, and so much money came in, and the party ended up caring about our area so much that they made a TV commercial for me. So everything I showed you before, we put out without money on our social media. We ended up spending around $80,000 showing this to televisions the 3 weeks before the election, because my opponent, the gift that keeps on giving, ended up doing an interview with the Journal Sentinel. You can still find it online, where not only is he wearing his mask incorrectly, but he clearly has no idea what's going on. It was a bounty. And so we ran with it and ran this television commercial. It's only 30 seconds that I will show you. It also has captions on it that I did, just in case the audio doesn't work here. This was made by the party. It was shown on televisions across my district for the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the election. And then we'll kind of close out. Here it is.
What's Ken Skoronsky's plan to fight COVID-19?
I don't know.
What should the legislature do to stop more Wisconsinites from dying?
I don't know.
Should the legislature do anything to slow the spread of this illness?
How?
I'm asking you.
I know, I'm asking you.
My name is Jacob Malinowski, and it's been over 180 days since the legislature has done anything to fight COVID-19. As your representative, I will jump into action to help families and small businesses while keeping people safe.
Simple, to the point. Let my opponent do all the talking. And so we continued to fight day in and day out. Things were looking good. Election day came. Obviously, we didn't get the results we were hoping for. We ended up having the second closest loss across the entire state. And we ended up running the closest to Joe Biden that anyone did. Any Democrat, including those who won, meaning we had more Joe Biden voters vote down ballot for us than anybody else did, or we had more Trump voters decide to vote for the Democrat down ballot more than anyone else did. I actually did better than Joe Biden in my hometown in Greendale in most parts of it. And we were able to achieve these results. I said we had a massive budget. Candidates we did better than had $400,000, $600,000, $1.2 million in their bank accounts. And I think we were able to accomplish that result because we had an amazing team of volunteers and because we were willing to work for it. I was willing to have those conversations, willing to have policy ideas, actually get out there and fight for our community. So while we lost by about 1,200 votes, I'm really, really proud of the work we were able to do. And upon reflecting, I think we did an excellent job. So that's sort of the unceremonious end to this very grandiose journey that had a lot of ups and a lot of downs. But I think the long-lasting effects of it will be seen for a while. Because the
Brian
race was so...
Allendorfer gave Chris, told me to call him about the ceiling.
And so because of the results we were able to achieve, I think that our part of town will have a bigger impact in the Democratic Party's mind. They will start focusing on the South suburbs where Democrats live. They exist. They want to support them, but they're worried their neighbors don't. The number of conversations I had with people who said, wow, I'm like the only Democrat on my street. And I say, I've said that to 3 or 4 people who live on your street. Our ability to actually hold our representative accountable, I don't think he's going to run again. I'm not going to run again unless he does, and then we'll have a great rematch in 2022. But he will be 84 in 2022, so I don't think he will be running again. If he does choose to, I'll be there. But I really had a great time. I learned a lot about politics. I learned a lot about what it means to kind of fight for your community, to do it for the good reasons. And I learned a lot about what normal people think about politics. I always thought about it from this very political angle. Always worked on campaigns, studied it in college, and then I ended up, having real conversations with people who don't think about politics every day, who don't really care about elections. They show up to vote, and they want someone who cares about their family, and that's sort of what we were able to accomplish. I'm super proud of the work we were able to do. I'm still sort of fighting here in Wisconsin. I'm helping some of the local candidates here in the county. I'm now the Milwaukee County Democratic Party's secretary. So I take the minutes and I'm involved in leadership decisions to make sure that the Democratic Party does come down here to the South suburbs and actually does stay engaged and is a part of our community so that we can continue to win. I'd like to think we helped push Joe Biden over the finish line. I'd like to think we helped other Democrats across the state by showing an atypical type of Democrat, someone who is not always spouting the party line and who's willing to get into the details and willing to rally the community to show who the true enemy is, and it is not each other. Your enemy is not the other person struggling, it's the person who's making you struggle. And I think that message really rings true. Jerry asked me to share deeper insights about politics. I'm 22, almost 23, so I don't know if I have any deeper insights that other folks here wouldn't have. I don't have anything particularly insightful to say. What I do have to say is to stay engaged. 2020 was grandiose. Joe Biden won, which is great. Democrats kind of control the Senate, which is great. They narrowly control the House, which is great. But 2022 here in Wisconsin is going to be really big. We have new maps. So all of your down ballot races are way different. Our governor is up. We have a senator up. And those elections are equally, if not more, important. Tony Evers is the only reason we have a mask mandate. Tony Evers is the only reason we have so many things in this state. And I grew up under a Scott Walker administration, which for years didn't really care about my family. So I hope you stay engaged. My deeper political insight is only that you should listen and talk with people who you disagree with. I'm sure people come on here who you disagree with. Maybe you disagree a lot with me, but we have a lot in common with each other. Unless you're a billionaire sitting on this call, we probably agree with a lot more than we disagree on. And I think those conversations are really important. At no point did I ever call myself a Republican or a conservative. At no point was I willing to lie or not say what I truly felt about things. But I was willing to listen to people who didn't agree with those things. And I was willing to kind of reframe what I was talking about so that everyone could understand it and so that we could really see that we were on the same page. My last comment is that I had a neighbor who lives on my street for years. Her name is Judy. She's wonderful. Judy is our street's conservative, very loud about it. She is the person who knows everything that's going on in the village. We were still able to joke around all the time, even though she had my opponent's sign in her yard. Even though she was a big Trump fan, she wanted to build the wall. We agreed on some things and we were able to have some sort of civil discourse. I'm not saying you have to be civil with the people who hate you because of what you look like, what you believe in, who you choose to love. But I am saying that our neighbors have a lot to teach us if you're willing to listen. That's kind of what I have. I probably went way over my time, but I'm willing to kind of answer questions from chats or things people have to say. I don't know if I can get the chat on my phone, but I really appreciate you having me here and listening to my story. It's unique, it's different. I don't know if it's inspiring, but it's something, that's for sure.
Lorraine, have you been able to follow the questions on chat? You have to unmute yourself.
Hi.
So maybe you can read. You're still muted.
Now. Okay, Jacob, there's two questions on the chat that are kind of related, dealing with
Okay.
the communities that you've lived in. Now, Greendale has a history of Green Newtown dating back to the 1930s. It was wondering if that living experience changed your perspective in any way. And then as well in New Haven with Yale, kind of situated in the middle of an impoverished neighborhood, how did the students at Yale reach out to those people of those communities to run for office or to be politically involved?
Great questions. I am a product of my environment. I think most of us are. And kind of my entire story is rooted in where I have lived. And it has been two places, Greendale and New Haven. I've called both of those places home at one point or another. Greendale, as you mentioned, is a 1930s New Deal green community. So it was planned to be sort of a utopia. There were free houses for those who were suffering from the Dust Bowl, poor farmers who were out of work, to come and live in Greendale. There are three of these communities across the country. Now on the other side, so on one side you have essentially, I'm not mincing words here, a communist utopia. Everyone had a job, everyone had a place to live, no matter what. On the other hand, it was incredibly redlined. Only white families were allowed to live there. Greendale has maintained that sense of community for a very long time. So I learned a lot by living in a place where you could say what section you are from, which is how I introduce myself, because the streets are alphabetized. A place where people care about you, where you can give vegetables to your neighbors, and who know everything about you. You can be raised by the village. I learned a lot about that. I also learned what it means when a community starts to sort of reconcile with its past. Greendale is starting to realize how it became, not only the really positive parts, which have manifested itself, but some of the negatives. It looks the way it does because of history. That's nothing to be ashamed of. It's not my fault. It's not my parents' fault. It's not even my grandparents' fault. Somebody's fault. But realizing your ability to connect with your neighbor and maybe identify problems we have and how we can fix them. That's what I sort of learned from growing up in Greendale. And then New Haven, very different place. Like I said, 38 languages are spoken in a town of 168,000 people. First sanctuary city. There are 7 college campuses across the city, one of them being mine. So engaging with the community is something I think Yale students should do in a very thoughtful way. It's one thing to kind of be like the white guy who saves the town. It's another thing to elevate the voices of New Haven residents and just use my skills to help them succeed, not to be the one who succeeds in and of himself. So I always tried to be of utility to the city. I taught kind of like Park and Rec, except it's free for anyone who goes to school in New Haven. It's called Splash. Yale students can teach any class they want. I noticed that Yale students, or that New Haven schools, were kind of missing a civic class. So I taught a lot of different social studies classes. I also helped coach and judge debate tournaments, which were run by the school for New Haven high schools because they didn't have debate programs. The second thing I really learned from New Haven, beyond this sort of community elements, embracing our differences, helping each other out, was to identify the enemy. I said this before, and I'll say it again. Other people struggling are not your enemies. It's the person causing the struggle. In New Haven, Yale owns 50% of the property. Because Yale is a nonprofit, it cannot be taxed. So 50% of New Haven's lands cannot go under property taxes. Yale has bought up a lot of neighborhoods. It does not allow many New Haven students to attend. It is a overall pretty destructive force in the community. And identifying that and being able to sort of reconcile that and point out to other New Haven residents that the other part of town is not who you should dislike. They are not taking your jobs. They are not busting your unions. They are not ruining your community. It's the university, and it is bad actors within the system. I learned a lot about how to communicate while in New Haven, how to sort of explain what you were thinking through a lens that other people could understand, not using buzzwords, not using, loaded language, but to sort of explain a problem and see how we as a community can tackle it. That's what I learned. I'm definitely a product of my environment, though.
Okay, couple other things that come together here, and then we can maybe look for someone with a question in the group. Couple things people are wondering about your future. Are you going
Me
to work
too.
on, well, just in terms of politics, that we'll stick with that. Just, are you interested in working on gerrymandering, fair maps? Why won't you run again locally, even if your opponent didn't? With all this national exposure, are you going national? Where can we find you when we want to support you, Jacob?
I appreciate that. Yeah, so the problem in Wisconsin is gerrymandering. That's the reason for most of why we haven't been able to get any progress. For those who are unfamiliar, gerrymandering is the process of drawing unfair maps so that whoever's in charge gets more seats. We have a terribly gerrymandered map right now. It will probably still be gerrymandered next cycle. It's going to take a lot of hard work to make the maps even close to fair. So if you want to know like the answer, the problem in Wisconsin, it is the fact that we don't have fair maps. So not only do we not have a real fair balance of power, but also even the members of their own party have no incentive to listen because they're gonna win their seats. Their only risk is being primaried from the left or from the right. That's why, unfortunately, the Republican Party in this state has gone way out there for the most part. There are a few Republicans left in this state who represent what I think a classic 1970s, 80s Wisconsin Republican looks like, someone like my father. But most of our representatives are far right, QAnon, anti-vax lunatics, to be frank. So that's the right answer. I'd love to help if there are projects in that regard. In terms of my future, I learned I'm just much better behind the scenes. It's something I enjoy. I like helping other people in their ambition. My one goal, like I said, was not to be the guy, the representative. I wanted to get my bad incumbent out of there. So if he runs again, my goal is still the same, and I will do it again. But if he doesn't, then I'm more than happy to help other people sort of realize their goals and help with their ambition. A good point brought up by someone who I think you're all familiar with is Senator Larson, who on the phone with me said, what's really the difference between getting the current incumbent who you don't like out of there and someone who's the exact copy of him? I don't have a good answer to that question. So in regards to my future, I'm not really sure. I appreciate the support. My interest has always been on the smaller side of government, so local and state level. I think nothing gets done in federal government, even when one party controls all three branches. So that's not really my interest. But kind of want to stay engaged. I care about this place, so want to see it become better.
Okay, we have one more thing from chat, but is there anyone who would like to just offer a question? And then Mark, I don't know how long we have. What's your?
I'm kind of a talker, so I apologize.
That's a good thing.
I
That's
think
good.
we should have one question and then wrap it up. Anybody who wants to ask a question will need to unmute themselves.
Yeah, don't forget. Take it from
I'll ask a question. I got to get one in there. I think it's really important that we have a candidate who is well coordinated. And Jacob did that catching video on one take. I mean, that was amazing.
Yeah, that's now there were 50 takes before that it didn't work. But yes, that is unedited. It took 8 hours to film that. In the hot August sun in the parking lot of the sports complex.
You were really working. Yeah, that was very impressive. I love that video so much. But I just have one question for you. I guess you'd say you're a Zoomer or you're Generation Z. And what's your thoughts on your generation getting involved more in politics? What's their main issues? Is it environmental? Most of us always think it's environmental issues. Maybe it's something else. And it seems like you had a good experience at Yale. You really had a lot of activism there. Do you think that's, we're looking at you guys to save us, tell you the truth. And because we're not getting it done here, us older folks. So
So
You
I
think,
am.
there's a lot of interest in getting into politics in your generation. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
So I am the oldest possible you can be while being in Gen Z. I know that, like, to me, that makes me feel old, but I recognize the audience. So Gen Z is like 1997, 1998. That's when I was born. So I've been able to kind of see a lot of it happen. I definitely identify as a Zoomer, a Gen Z person. I'm worried that they're going to think we're called Zoomers because of the pandemic and Zoom, but it was called that way before this. So I will say two things. Number one, we are the products of our environment. So you have to think of what Gen Z has lived with. So all I really remember is post 9/11. That's my memory. I don't really remember anything before 9/11. I was 3 when 9/11 happened. Again, sorry if you feel dated. I was like kind of becoming aware of the world in 2009, 2010, 2011. So that's the stock market crash. That's the Obama inauguration. That's Osama bin Laden being killed. Right. So like and then I am now in high school with Donald Trump. Got elected when I was a freshman in college. So I went through all of college with Donald Trump. And now I am graduating as a young person looking for a job in not an economic recession, but definitely like a social, cultural recession of the pandemic. So my entire life, for the most part, has been shaped by like incredible global tragedies. I'm not saying the killing of Osama bin Laden is a tragedy, obviously not, but incredible global events, far more than I believe happened in that short amount of time in previous generations, simply because we were not as global as we are now. So the ability for those things to happen couldn't. All of my information comes at the snap of a finger on my phone, which I'm a native of. I'm a native of social media. I got a Facebook account when I was 10 years old. So that environment means I feel very connected to people who I don't know, or I'm even more connected to the people I do know. I think that that is making a generation that I think is very empathetic. I think that generation understands differences better than even like millennials understand differences. And I think that that generation is incredibly involved because it is very easy to see what is going on when it's not in your backyard. So often activism produces people because of their the products of their environment, right? So like someone maligns your community, poisons your water, and now you care about it. Well, now if I live in a white suburb in Greendale, where, you know, I have a pretty comfortable life, things are grand, obviously tragedy strikes, but it's a really good community. But like, I can see videos of this stuff really easily. Or I go to school, you know, or I play video games, or I'm on TikTok with people who are really struggling. And being able to see all of that, especially live, I think can turn people far more empathetic. So I have hope, especially for people who are slightly younger than me, who grew up even more in this. Like I remember, okay, this is gonna make you feel old. I remember when TVs were big and computers were big, and now it's all small. But it does give me a lot of hope. I think people will naturally be more engaged because of their ability to see what's going on elsewhere, outside of their own backyard, in an instant, and more importantly, by accident. You could be super engaged 20 years ago when you read the news, watch television all the time, but like, I can't help but be engaged because I'm on social media, because I have friends all across the country, all across the world. And I think that will make a good generation. I hope. Maybe.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's give a little round of applause here.
I don't know how to do that, but thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to end the meeting now unless we have anything other.
Can I
feel free to circulate my contact information. My cell phone number, my email. Perfect. If you want to chat, add me on Facebook. Do whatever you have to do. I really appreciate you having me.
That's kind of what I wanted to mention. I put Jay Heck's contact information, our last forum speaker. He's on chat. I put our next forum speaker, February 28th, is George Martin. He's going to talk about police accountability.
Nice.
And I'm putting stuff on chat now that people have been asking me for. So we'll get you in there too. Okay, Jacob.
Okay, I'm ending the meeting now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob, so much.
Thank you, Jacob, so much.
Wonderful talk.
Thank you.